We're talking about this trade, and look, I'm like many Warrior fans today, in that it's going to be very, very difficult to have Chris Paul wearing a Warrior uniform. However, I will also admit this: we have shown as sports fans, and I don't mean us here in the Bay Area. I don't care who you root for. Sports fans have shown that you will wrap your heads around the player you think you would never welcome. Richard Sherman was a 49er and a beloved one.
Man.
Oral Hershiser pitched for the Giants. So did Randy Johnson. We could go on and on. Players who you think are the most hated ones out there. If they come play well, you will emotionally figure out how to deal with it.
Right?
I know that.
Well, I mean, David West is a great example. I mean, I remember how much I hated David West.
Did you hate David West?
Of course not. With New Orleans, man, I was out for that guy. Sean Livingston was a Clipper, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
We hated the Clippers.
Yeah, good point.
I'm trying to think about the Warrior equivalent, like before this. Even Baron Davis, who, Baron had bounced around a little bit. You never had that visceral dislike for Baron Davis.
No.
Even though he was a Clipper.
Steven Jackson comes after the malice. Yeah,
whatever.
There are a few players who we always talk about, and he was on my list. 5 NBA players who you never want on the Warriors. And I would say probably Paul, Harden, Blake Griffin, Russell Westbrook, and who's the one I'm forgetting?
Not LeBron.
No.
I had LeBron on my list because we did this a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, it wasn't LeBron. It might have been Patrick Beverly. Anyway, Chris Paul.
It was Dylan Brooks.
Dylan Brooks, thank you.
Yeah, of course. He was number 1 and number 2 on your list.
Dylan Brooks. With Marcus Smart coming off the bench of my team that I don't want on the Warriors.
Marcus Smart's
He's
been traded.
He's going to replace Dylan Brooks.
And Dylan Brooks is available.
Yeah.
So
No, Mike. No, Dunleavy.
Are you saying he's not available?
I'm saying no. You hear me? I don't want. If you're going to make me like one of these guys, I'm not liking 2 of them.
A second unit of Paul, Beverly, Brooks, Dwight Howard,
Westbrook.
Let's go, dude.
I can't wait. All right. We'll see if PBJ will eat a PBJ here in 10 minutes. But first.
That's a tease.
Chris in San Jose. Hey, Chris. Thanks for calling Willard and Dibs. What are you doing today?
Hey, thanks, guys. Yeah, Chris Paul and Harden, those were the 2 guys that I always loved to hate. But I tell you, Chris Paul, a 38-year-old Chris Paul, and the amount of load management that Kerr's going to do, we haven't had a backup like that since Sean Livingston. And I think we've needed that. I think that's been a missing piece, a Sean Livingston type. So I'm excited about this trade.
Well, Chris, I tell you where you have.
Yeah, Chris.
I'll tell you where you have what I think is a really, really solid point. Whether it's Chris Paul or anyone else, you could just put any veteran presence in there or whatever. When Steph left the game last year, and the second unit or whatever the calculus was when Steph was out,
the non-Steph minutes,
it felt like things were often out of control and completely loose.
Always.
It just felt like a train off the tracks at times. Sometimes Jordan made that work because he can thrive in chaos sometimes because his game is chaotic. So there are times where it looked like he's going to fall over, and the next thing you know, he's laying it in for a beautiful reverse layup. So I get that. But whatever Chris Paul is at this point in his career, I will admit he is that. He's a stabilizer. I think he is the type of person who, when Steph is not in the game, you put the ball in his hands, and you're confident that it's not going to just go sideways. It's not as dynamic. It's not as likely to end up in the hole from him, but it is going to be calmer. I'll give it that.
And he's going to make players around him better. I never got the sense that Jordan Poole made those around him better. And that's a big part of being the backup point guard when you've got a second unit of 20-year-olds. And Patrick Baldwin Jr. will join us here momentarily, another young player. But Jordan Poole is not the kind of player to come in and stabilize and make those around him play better. Jordan Poole was 15th to last in the association in field goal percentage last year. He shot 43% from the floor, and he shot the ball a lot. He shot 16 times a game, and he didn't shoot it very accurately. It felt like when Jordan Poole came on, he was coming in looking for his. He wasn't looking for his teammates. And that's where Chris Paul is going to come in. Chris Paul's not coming in thinking, I need 20 and 10. I need to cement my legacy. All he needs to do to make his legacy better is win a championship. So if he comes in off the bench, and I would anticipate that he does come in off the bench, I can't imagine a scenario where he starts for this team.
They don't do this deal unless they called Chris and his agent, and he said, yeah.
Agreed.
I'm fine backing up Steph Curry.
He's played 1,214 games in the league, and he started 1,214 games.
And has absolutely no rings for that effort.
Correct. But to that point, if Chris Paul comes in here knowing what, and I agree with exactly what you just said, where Mike Dunleavy Jr. says to Chris Paul's agent, this is a backup role, and his agent goes, Chris, are you okay backing up? Chris goes, hell yeah. I want what they have. I want one of those 28 diamond things on their fingers.
Well, you wonder.
Because Clay's got 4. He showed me in Phoenix.
Exactly. Well, you wonder, as Phoenix is getting tossed out of the playoffs there by the Nuggets, you wonder if it crossed Chris's mind. I can't do this as the lead guy. Like I've tried. I've tried for 15 years. Or a little bit less, whatever.
More.
Maybe more. I've tried. It hasn't worked. It's not going to work. Phoenix is moving on from me. It's not like there are any options out there for me to go be the starting point guard on a championship team.
How about 18 years?
Wow. Maybe the Lakers. But I don't know that would have felt all that different to him. You know what I mean? Like, Chris Paul is not going to start, but he might finish. He might finish a lot of games.
Right.
Yes, that lineup. You remember when Iguodala would come in and they would call it the death lineup. Yeah, I think that lineup will happen at the end of games when everyone's healthy. It might happen twice all year when they're all healthy. But when Paul, Steph, Clay, Draymond, and Wiggins are all ready to go, could that be a closing lineup? Absolutely.
And what a closing lineup that would be in terms of...
Maybe.
Well,
yeah.
I mean,
yes.
Put aside your Chris Paul disdain, but think about Chris Paul as a player on the ball where Draymond comes over and you run that screen and roll, and now Chris Paul gets the screen from Draymond.
We'll see.
Chris Paul would you work with me for a minute before you're hating on it because you're thinking about Chris Paul, the player you hate.
No, but some of you guys...
Think about it from a basketball standpoint.
But some of you guys who are very in favor of Chris Paul and even were last week do sound a little bit like you're talking out of both sides of your mouth because you've been at the front of the line of the declining mid-30-year-olds can't do it anymore. And then in your next sentence, you're like, but here's what Chris Paul can do. Well, wait a minute. He's 38?
I'm telling you what he can do. And if you just would work with me from a basketball standpoint,
go ahead.
When you've got Chris Paul running screen and roll with Draymond Green, where's Steph Curry? He's off the ball.
Yeah.
So whoever's guarding Steph Curry is going to have to stick to Steph, and the guy guarding Clay is going to have to stick to Clay. And you've got Wiggins who can then dive to the basket, and you've got all kinds of different options now in terms of Chris Paul on the ball, and then you've got Steph Curry running screen and roll.
If he can do it.
Mark, I watched every game from Phoenix last year. We've been over this, and Chris Paul was more than a useful player last year. He was not a broken down. We're not talking about Udonis Haslem. We're talking about a guy who played 30 minutes a night.
I'm just trying to figure out, since you've all told me that Steph, Clay, and Dre, who all statistically were better this year than they were last, yet you've been pounding into my head that they're declining, and then the team acquires Chris Paul, and you're like, rubbing your hands together like, now, here's what Chris Paul can do.
He's declining.
They're
all declining.
He's declining.
There's a difference between declining and over.
There's also a difference between declining and declined.
He's not declined.
He has declined.
Your credit card is declined.
That's not true. That used to happen. That used to happen. Not
Tim,
anymore.
For it.
Not anymore.
And that's a nice looking sweater you have on.
Shout out Odyssey.
Shout out 1994. Dude, my credit card was always declined.
Lucky in San Francisco next up. Lucky, hey, you're on with Willard and Debs. What are you doing, Lucky?
I'm sitting there in the parking lot waiting to head into work, man. How you guys doing today?
We don't good, bud.
Lucky?
What do you think?
I'm happy for Jordan Poole, but man, I do not like that we had 2-3-3, man. I hate dudes, man. We've been beating his A for 14 years. Why do we have him on our squad?
Yeah. Yeah.
I know we need a veteran presence. I get that. But they better, Mike Dunleavy better have a rabbit up his sleeve, man. I want to see something, man, because right now, man, it feels like somebody tried to give me a peanut butter sandwich, but it wasn't peanut butter. It was liverwurst. I don't want that.
Wait, now, what
that's
if we?
a whole different sandwich, Lucky.
Yeah, it is. What if we threw this at you, Lucky? Because remember, Mike Dunleavy, as much as we wish he worked for us, he works for the Warriors. And here's one thing. The more I think about this, the more people we're talking to and texting with, here's one thing that's abundantly clear. The organization is thrilled with this deal, and they're thrilled with this deal even if Chris Paul only plays 40 games next year and the Warriors bow out in the round that they bowed out in this year. And here's why they feel that way.
Talk to him, Mark.
They do not want to pay Jordan Poole $30+ million for 4 more years, especially since the new CBA has penalties that will go up even further after next year. Their thought process is we need to limit how many people on the team are making huge dollars. And the fact that Poole was automatically going to be one of them for 4 more years really gets in the way of the team wanting to do Steph and Clay and Draymond, and then after those guys retire, maybe other max contracts. I think that is as big a piece of this as the basketball side is in this upcoming year. See what I'm saying, Lucky?
Right, I get that financial part of it to save us some money. I get that. It's like, okay, well, we have a box of cereal that costs us $5, but if we get rid of it, we can have another $4 in our pocket. You know what I'm saying? So I understand that. I get that point. But it's just on the player aspect, I don't know. He has to tell me something that he can stay healthy, man, through the playoffs. That's when we're going to need him. So if he can stay healthy through the playoffs, okay, I'll have to just ride with it because I trust the Warriors. So we'll see what happens.
Thanks, Lucky.
Lucky, I hear you, but
we've been over this. Mark and I went through his playoff log, and only twice in his long career has he been hurt in the playoffs. And I know that recency bias would tell you that this year was one of them, and maybe they lost. No, it is, and it was, but I don't know if they lost because of it. But his whole career, it's not like he gets hurt every year in the playoffs.
Not every year. But he has multiple times before, and now he is 38 years old. I want to just mention, though, this financial aspect. It's not just as simple as saving money. It's also gaining flexibility.
Right.
I think the Warriors' plan here is not. I mean, this is where I do think you listen to Joe Lacob. When he says, come hell or high water, we're winning no matter what the rules are. This is what he means. It's not, I want to save a bunch of bucks and have it in my pocket. It's, I want to gain flexibility because when these 3 guys are done playing basketball, we plan to go get more amazing top of the NBA players and bring them to you here at Chase Center. That's going to be their goal all along. And if Jordan Poole is on the team making 30-some-odd million, and he is not an elite player, which I don't think he's going to be, he's very good. I don't ever think he's going to be a top 10 player in the NBA, then that gets in your way. It gets in your way. If you are a fan of the big 3 finishing their career together as Warriors, then you're a big fan of this deal.
I think so, yeah. And if you're a big fan of Joe Lacob and what he's done in terms of this organization and going for big things, then you're a fan of this deal. Because you look at what you talked about, the flexibility of the future, and if Jordan Poole is off the books in 3 years, and he will be, if Jonathan Kuminga turns out to be the player you thought he was going to be when you drafted him number 7 overall, in 3 years he's going to get a Jordan Poole-like contract because he's got a team option the next 2 years after this one to where you have a couple more years to look at Jonathan Kuminga and decide whether or not you want to keep him long-term or not. But if Jonathan Kuminga is a player that you want to keep, at that point, you're going to sign him to a long-term deal. Andrew Wiggins at that point will have a player option, and that's it. You won't have Steph. You won't have Clay. CP3 will be 42. He won't be a Warrior. You won't have Draymond. His contract, if he signs a 3-year deal, will be up, and you'll have that massive flexibility that Joe's talking about.
Scott in Fremont is next up here on Willie and Dibby Live. Chase Center floor, 2023 draft night, Jordan Poole trade on the books for Chris Paul. Hey, Scott, thanks for calling. What are you doing?
Hey, guys. Dibs, I love you, man, but I cannot believe what I'm hearing from you. The whole they traded for a Hall of Famer, that means nothing. That's who he was 5-6 years ago. And, Dunleavy's been on the job now for 4 days and traded for the only guy that Warrior fans hate more than him. They got older today.
Don't laugh at that.
That's a pretty good line.
They got less athletic. They got more injury prone. And Willard, I disagree with you about Kuminga. For Kuminga fans, I think it's a bad day.
Why?
I think it signals that he's going to get. I think it signals he's going to get traded because I think everyone assumes Draymond's coming back now that Poole's gone. Kerr has said multiple times they envision him as a four-man. There's no path for him to get minutes. Kerr refuses to play the young guys. There's no way they can make a selection at 19 today. I'm not sure what's going on. I get the flexibility. I got to believe that there would have been a guy out there with attaching the picks to who would have been available to play more. It would have made them a little bit bigger and a little bit more athletic. CP3 in a Warriors uniform just makes me sick to my stomach.
Yeah, Scott, I get that
Scott,
part.
thank you. And I love you too, by the way, Scott. The love is mutual. And, I'm just going to say this. They did trade for a Hall of Famer, and he was one of 4 players last year to average 14 and 9. These are facts.
Yeah, he's not a Hall of Fame level player anymore, which is also a fact.
Yeah, he's a Hall of Famer.
He's not. He will be.
He becomes their 5th best player in this upcoming year.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe
see.
6th behind Kevon.
I like the idea. I wonder what you think about this, though, because I do think it's a better day for Kuminga. I think he's more likely to stay. I'm not sure about that. He absolutely could be traded for the 7th pick later on tonight. That's possible. But I think that he is more likely to be on the team. I do think this is a better ball handler in his lineup than what he had previously. As far as the path for him to play minutes, listen, I will forever reject this idea that a lot of you are running with. Steve Kerr refuses to play young players. He played Jordan Poole? Didn't he play Jordan Poole? I thought he played Jordan Poole.
Jordan Poole is a 4-year veteran. He's not a young player.
He's been playing him for 3 years, though. So
he played him the first year because he had no choice.
Do you want to, Steve?
Then he sent him down to Santa Cruz.
Steve Kerr refuses to play the players who he doesn't think are going to do the job that is necessary for them to win. That's who Steve Kerr refuses to play.
But that, in many ways, is young players because young players, for the most part, aren't ready to contribute.
Yeah, by the way,
to a winning team.
That is not unique to Steve Kerr.
That's true.
Go to Popovich, go to Phil, go to all
Detroit
of the great
played
coaches.
young players.
Yes,
and
they did.
Stunk.
Yes, and they did an awesome job of 17 wins or whatever they got.
OKC played a lot of young players, but they had no choice.
Right. So when you get teams that are championship ready, it is normalcy that players who are not able to buy beer don't get a lot of minutes. That's normalcy. So I reject the idea that Steve won't play them. If Jonathan is ready to play better, and I thought Dunleavy did a good job of explaining this, we need to find a better way to get him minutes, and he needs to do a better job of getting the skill set to play those minutes. I thought that was a positive statement of we're going to share in the ability of building Jonathan a little bit of a better scenario on a runway this year. And that's the one maybe part of this deal or one of the parts of this deal that I like. I think this creates more of a runway for Jonathan. I think he moves up the totem pole. He's definitely in the top 8. And I think he can be more of a fixture in that second unit run by Chris Paul.
I think that's true, but I don't believe that this trade makes it more likely or less likely that he's on the team over the course of the next hour or so. I do think that he still is a live possibility to be traded before the Warriors pick at 19. I don't think the Chris Paul, Jordan Poole trade has anything to do with whether or not they want to keep Jonathan Kuminga. They either are going to keep him or they're looking to trade him. I think that those things are independent of what's already happened today with the word that the Warriors will trade Jordan Poole, Ryan Rollins, and picks for Chris Paul. I think that Jonathan Kuminga could still be dealt, and maybe you trade Kuminga. I think this, though, Mark, if you're going to trade Kuminga and the number 19 overall pick in a draft that starts in an hour and 20 minutes, I think it's not to move up in the draft. It's to get another veteran player. I think they're all in on playing veterans. And yes, Steve Kerr's not alone in not wanting to play younger players. look around the league and look at Miami, for example. All of their young guys who they leaned on, all those undrafted guys,
they weren't that young.
24 and 25. They're all Jordan Poole's age or even a year older. They're not 20. They're not PBJ. They're not Rollins, Wiseman, Kuminga, or Moody. They're all 4 years older than that. So when we talk about not wanting to play young guys, yes, teams that look to win, none of them lean on 20-year-olds in their core.
But I think we make it sound sometimes like when Steve Kerr, it's like he's got something actually against, like there's ageism going on, that he's got something against young players. He had no problem putting Moses Moody in the playoffs. His role went up. So to me, you are ignoring the fact that Kuminga clearly was doing things that made the team want to play him less in the playoffs. It wasn't his age. It was his production.
Inexperience.
Yes, it was his lack of production that put him on the bench. The playoffs are not a time to start developing people.